Welcome, everybody, to the Miami Jewish Film Festival, the world's largest festival of its kind. We want to thank all of our members, our sponsors, our community partners, all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, for their continued support throughout all of these years. My name is Rabbi Ed Farber. I am a Rabbi Emeritus with a part-time portfolio with Beth Torah Benning Rock campus here in the Aventura and North Miami Beach area. I'm very excited to have the privilege to moderate a virtual conversation with director Omri Bezalel, producer Ilan Arboleda, from the movie Listen, which is premiering at this year's festival. We thank you for all of you for joining us. So obviously I watched this movie, and as I'm watching it, which of course I watched it after October 7th. And although in my mind, I know this movie was made in 2022, I'm sitting there saying, how did they put this movie together so quick after October 7th? I couldn't think of a movie that was directed to questions, profound, deep questions that Israeli society is asking, and that all the Jewish community is struggling with, than what this movie did. So I wanted to first get a response to that, because obviously the problems after October 7th have been magnified, but the debate was always there. It might have been out in the open. It might have been a little bit more subdued. It's clearly out in the open now. And this movie, anybody who watches it is going to think it was just made 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's I kept thinking about the film, obviously, after October 7th. It became, very much more relevant, I felt, and obviously what happened after October 7th takes this to new proportions. Civilians and not soldiers, and so on and so forth. But I think you're right. These dilemmas are the dilemmas and the value of human life, and how we view that, and how we view collateral damage, so to speak, and all of that. These questions were relevant before, and even more so now.
Right, so those, obviously we can't give out the ending. We're not going to have a spoiler, but clearly the question, because it starts in the very beginning, deals with the issue of releasing prisoners in a prisoner exchange in the past, usually for soldiers, but in this case, we're dealing with mainly civilian hostages, and that the prisoners being released on Israel's side, which in case of Shalit was, I think it was 1,000 to 1 almost, those are not civilians. Those are in many cases vicious terrorist murderers. And in the film, the whole question is, if they release these particular requested prisoners, they were going to include the terrorist who arranged the murder of this particular, Darren Nevo is her name, this particular intelligence officer who's apparently and portrayed as one of the most brilliant. They're going to release the murderer of her father, a attack that she survived. And so she struggles with that. And this whole question of the, not only proportionality, it's not so much the proportionality of 1,000 to 1 or 100 to 1 or 3 to 1. It's that we're dealing with releasing people who come back and very often arrange for or commit many more murders. And this is one of the questions that's being struggled with. So I wanted to have you comment on that particular issue, which is really haunting the Israeli and I hate to say Israeli and haunting good people's conscience. All good people, whether it be Israeli Americans or anywhere in the world, this has to halt. We're dealing with good and evil. We're not dealing with Israeli and Palestinian. This is good and evil. So it's a question that's haunting all of us, all those who understand what this battle is all about.
Yeah, I mean, Omri, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I read it one place and I didn't read it again. But obviously, this story is inspired a lot by the Shalit story. And I read somewhere that the person who orchestrated the Shalit kidnapping was part of the prisoner exchange that in that prisoner exchange, the guy who orchestrated the most recent October 7th attack was in part of that prisoner exchange, correct?
That's correct.
So, I mean, that couldn't make it more relevant to the story. That's exactly what our main character, Dara, is afraid of. And it's exactly what plays out this time. I mean, for me, the film was a polemic. It was supposed to incite conversation. in the absence of something like October 7th. And then now it almost has a different, in some way, different responsibility. I'm not quite sure what that is. So I'm actually happy to be talking to you about that here, because the film for me was always, let's take a look at what's happening in this, in the absence of an extreme situation. And now we're in this extreme situation. And the parallels are, like you said, are uncanny. But at the same time, it's a problem that was never going away. So at some point it was bound to happen, unfortunately.
Right, exactly. So I'm a little older than you guys. I'm a lot older than you guys, right? So when the hostages were taken during Jimmy Carter's administration in Iran, and there were two attitudes towards it, because that goes back to the very beginning of the whole radical Islamic movement, right? Iran just, the Shah being kicked out, the radicals moved in. The world doesn't know exactly what it is, but we see it real quick, real quick. They take over our embassy and take hostages. There are many who believe that if Carter had made it clear that we're not going to deal for the hostages, you're going to return them in 24 hours, or you're not going to exist as a regime in 48 hours. If he had taken that harsh stance and threatened to immediately destroy their entire oil industry and then take out their electrical grid and destroy the Navy, which could have been done in less than 48 hours, because Iran was defenseless at that point, and certainly against America is even defenseless today. Many argued that position. The other position argued, of course, well, let's deal for the hostages, they're the most. And many believe that since that day, radical Islam has always understood that hostage taking will accomplish their goals. So this is the position of Dara. Dara she's struggling with, how do we let hostages go? Because then they accomplish their goals, and then it escalates and it gets worse and worse. So I wanted you to comment on that, the fact that we have that precedent with Jimmy Carter, and I don't want to say anything negative about a man who was still observing the 30 days of mourning for, but that we know is simply a fact of how radical Islam understood that hostage taking and terrorism could further their goals, because the West was not willing to stand up to it.
I'm also part Colombian. Colombia, there was a number of years where kidnapping was a very big business.
Yes.
And there was a group of people who didn't want to take it anymore. They made a pact, and it was actually a family in the coffee growing region who made a pact, and they said that if one of us gets kidnapped, we're going to, whoever it is, we're going to refuse to pay, because we cannot continue the precedent, because they'll continue to have leverage. They made that pact. One of the brothers was kidnapped. They honored the pact, and they were killed, and the kidnapping stopped after that.
Right. So
that's a hard price to pay, but to your point, the kidnappings continue, because you're right, they have leverage and they know what works.
Right.
And I think that's like, with Dara's brother in the movie, who says, and that happened after the Shalit exchange, where soldiers, signed their names that they didn't want terrorist exchange for them if they were taken. I think Israel has also changed as a country in the last few decades, and I think it's much harder for the Israeli people to suffer loss, I think. And you can see it, you've seen it I think since in the past 20, 30 years. So I think here definitely Hamas, Hezbollah, terrorist organizations have sensed that they can get more for terrorism, for hostage situations. And I think what makes it hard for Dar, a question that I asked, and I don't have an answer as a director, but it's something that I also asked the actress, and she made her own choice about it. If would Dar be doing the same thing? Would she act the same if one of the terrorists hadn't killed her father?
Right.
And is there something? And I think it's a little bit of everything, because she's a person, and she's and she's complicated. But is it something selfish that she's doing, or selfless that she's doing? And I think that part of what makes her story unique, and the story of the Israeli military, which I was trying to show, is that it's that you can, Friday morning you can be in the mission, whether it's in the territories or Gaza, or in the war room, and by the evening you're with your family around the dinner table for Shabbat.
Right.
And my commander used to say in the military, he said, it's the people build the army builds the people. So I think that her and Maya and the rest of the characters, they find themselves in these situations where they're not just soldiers, they're also citizens. They're not civilians, but they're still citizens. and these things feed each other in a way that makes it a much more complex web to navigate.
Right. So that takes us to another issue that's dealt with in the film that you made. And by the way, I'm ready to give her a Oscar. I don't think they qualify for Oscars. I'm not sure how it works in foreign films, but that acting had to drain her, just absolutely drain her completely. The character is incredibly, incredibly believable. But the other question is, as you brought up, so, because they're civilians and they're soldiers, there is the question is raised in the film about soldiers who feel that the orders that they've been given is something they just can't obey. And this is something every soldier has to struggle with. And it's come into light in modern period where soldiers think perhaps they've been given an order that is dangerous for the nation, dangerous for the people, or an order that they might think is immoral, unethical, and that they're struggling within the movie about who to listen to, my conscience, what I know is right, or my commander. And then the commander, of course, is making an assumption. My soldier would never go against my command, even though I know my soldier doesn't agree with it. So there's a struggle there that seems to be coming into the forefront. And that's a moral struggle. It's something we hope every soldier struggles with. But what happens if too many decide to go in a direction the opposite of what their orders are?
Yeah, it's a tough situation, and when you first enlist into the military, you're taught in basic training, you're taught there are 7 values for the IDF. Friendship and I'm trying to translate it. Sticking to the mission and human life is one of them also. And I think a lot of times those 2 values of how do you say, it's not sticking to the kudba mesima, it's called, where you push forward to finish your mission no matter what. That value versus the value of the sanctity of life, I think a lot of times those 2 can collide. And I think that's what happens here also. And there's no right or wrong answer. You're taught the values of the IDF, and you're taught, and everyone comes with their values from home, whether they're for better or worse. And you're also taught that you're supposed to question your commanders to a certain sense, which I feel is also a very Jewish thing, right? To question and to those who are above you.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no right answer, but you're taught you're taught the rules, and you're taught the values, and you're taught that you're supposed to question, and you're trusted to do what you think is best. And soldiers don't always do the right thing. And
the brilliance of the movie is that we're not third person looking, already knowing what happened and looking back. That some movies do that. They show you the result and then they go back and show you how it happened. We're walking alongside with the characters and going through their struggles. And we don't know where they're headed. They don't know where they're headed. So we are going through this journey, which is why, as my wife and I were watching the movie, we were on the edge of our seats. And where our kishkas are turning, because we're asking the question, what would we decide? What would we do? I have 11 grandchildren in Israel. One's in the army right now. And yes, and she was at Shabbat table this weekend. Well, she had the weekend off. So you look and say, what will my grandchildren be going through as they struggle through this? And so the reason the movie is so real is, in real life, you don't know what the end is. You're walking the path and you don't know the result and you don't make a conclusion. There's no conclusions in the movie. It's just a struggle with really powerful, deep moral questions, which is why I think it's going to resonate so incredibly strong with the audience, because there's no lecturing. There's no posturing. There's just, this is the struggle with Dara, struggle with her commander, struggle with the Israeli. I wanted to ask about so let's focus on that just for a moment. That whole issue of that personal struggle that every soldier has to go through.
That really was our goal. Our goal was just to kind of present something and allow that struggle to unfold. I think we really tried not to lecture and not to posture, and to really and to really not have it just be one-sided rah-rah, Dara, or and try to show the different perspectives. again, I think you have a few characters there that are that approach that struggle very differently. I think Dara is the most strong-headed for sure, but I think but Maya is also a strong character. I think everyone. I'm not sure I realized this before, but from what you're saying, I realize that almost all the characters they really drive they really follow their beliefs, right? I mean, Guy with what he does, and Maya with what she does, and Dara with what she does. And it's interesting. It was always interesting to me as a soldier how people can experience, and it's not just the military, right? People can experience the same thing and they take it in different ways and they see it in different ways and it makes them act in different ways. And that's I think what I was trying to explore. So as to the question of I think so everybody comes to that struggle from their different places. And ultimately I think you don't have ultimately all you have is is your values and what you think is right. And I think everyone in the film more or less really tries to do what's right. And in the end, like I said, there's no right answer, but there are consequences to those actions.
Just to elaborate on that, I really
Yeah.
agree. What I love about the film is that everyone makes a choice and they follow this. They have the strength of their convictions, and there's no ambiguity among
Mhm.
the characters, but there is an ambiguity in the film itself because
Yes.
some of these choices are diametrically opposed. I think that is what's real, and that is what is organic to the story, to real life, not just the story itself. And that's I think Omri brilliantly did it in both the screenwriting and in the direction, and the characters themselves. We had wonderful actors who really understood these characters and really dug deep. You mentioned the character who played the woman who played Dara, as well as the other actors. They all really inhabited these roles and lived with it. There was a sense of that when filming.
They also, as you mentioned, they knew there were consequences. They understood the consequences and they accepted them. And one of the things that we see, particularly in America today, is that we have a generation that actually doesn't believe in consequences and doesn't anticipate consequences. When you anticipate consequences, your decision is profoundly a moral decision, an ethical decision, because you understand that your decision has consequences. When people think decisions have no consequences, they can go willy-nilly and do anything they really want, even if they haven't thought about it deeply, because what's the big deal? There's not going to be consequences. Something we're debating here in America, in which we feel that there's not enough consequences to not just bad behavior, but literally dangerous behavior. So another issue, very important, it showed very clearly how the Israeli army was struggling with avoiding civilian casualties. We see the aborting of a mission because they're afraid the civilian casualties would be too serious. Now, this is something we know Israel has always abided by, more than any army in the history of the world, certainly more than any army today, concerns itself with civilian casualties. Yet we've had such trouble because of what I consider very corrupt media, getting this message across that even today, with going on Gaza, there are hundreds, thousands of missions going on, but nobody knows about the number of missions that are aborted or changed that literally put Israeli soldiers' life more at risk in order to avoid unnecessary, it's hard to define that, but unnecessary or unacceptable in terms of the mission, civilian casualties. It's something that every Israeli commander struggles with, yet we've not been able to get that across, that that's what's going on right now in Gaza as the Israelis decide how to crush this Nazi-like enemy, Hamas.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. It's always been that way. Yeah, I mean, I was in a mission where we had a very high level Hamas in our sights, and he was carrying a boy. He was carrying a young boy with him all the time, using him as a human shield, and it worked. He got away because we didn't take that shot, and it happens all the time. Unfortunately, civilians, do die, and it's happening in Gaza now. Again, it's not about a blame game. I think it's very hard. I think the hardest thing also in Israel that's changed is that we're no longer fighting nation armies, right? We're not fighting
Mhm.
Egypt, Iraq, and like we did in 67, 73, and so on. You're fighting, it's guerrilla warfare and it's terrorist groups, and there are no rules. And that's one thing that I also think that people don't understand about war, that and it's hard to win when you won't surrender the moral high ground. And I don't believe that Israel has surrendered the moral high ground. But it is hard to fight that way. It's hard the way it comes across in the world. And yeah, it's a very frustrating situation, but I agree. I do think that Israel is a moral, and again, to say a moral army, it's hard to define what a moral army is, because war in its essence is immoral. I mean, there's not it's you have rules and you have laws and so on and so forth, but war is a messy thing. And I think that's also what we tried to show in the film, that it's messy, it's not black and white, and people are going to be hurt and people are going to die, and it's a cost, and it's something that's costing everyone dearly on both sides. Um, yeah.
So let me focus on one other thing before we conclude. It was a side issue, but it was very fascinating, particularly for those of us who remember Private Ryan. Finding Private Ryan, because that was a case where two brothers had been killed in World War II, and there was a third brother out there, and they had to get him out because the parents could not suffer the loss of three children. And people died getting Private Ryan out to safety. And there was a little part of the movie that dealt with the question of, if parents have lost a child in the war, then for the next child to do combat, it suggested they needed permission of the parents, which of course would create what a conflict between generations. And can parents have that kind of say over their adult children? If they weren't adults, they wouldn't be drafted into the army. So they're adults. So how does that play out within Israeli society? Because unfortunately, there's a lot of parents who've lost already one child in IDF.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very tough situation. It happens all the time. Even on October 7th, you have I mean, there was a woman now whose father was killed in 73 and her husband was killed in 82 and her son was just killed. um and yeah, and I have children, but they're young, and I can't imagine that. Again, I think it's something that's very unique to Israeli society. Um, and I think it speaks as to, and look, I think a lot of parents don't sign. I had a friend whose father wasn't even killed in the military. His father died of a heart attack, and his mother signed for him, and after a week of him in infantry, she took it back, and she took him out of combat. I don't think I can, you can't blame her. I do remember a woman, I forget her name, but she had four sons who were killed. Four sons who were killed.
Oh,
They
right.
were Saving Private Ryan, right? And she says, and I remember her saying, like, but if each one hadn't have gone, who would have gone? And
Mm-hmm.
I think it speaks to real strength that Israeli society has. And because in the end, also, we're not fighting a war thousands of miles away from home.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now, by the way, after October 7th, for the first time in a long time, I think there's a real sense of purpose, where the attack, I don't think the situation here has ever felt so immediate. At least not even when I fought in the Second Lebanon War, and it's still kind of far away, and it's still, but now, but I think now for the first time in a long time, we're feeling the immediacy of it, and you're feeling the mission of it. And again, I think it's something unique to Israeli society that really speaks to the strength of its people.
Mm-hmm. So, Ilan, having come to, when did you get to Israel from Colombia?
Oh no, I'm in Miami.
You're
I'm
in
not.
Miami now.
I'm not in
Okay.
Israel.
Well, everybody from Colombia is in Miami. They're in my shul.
They're all at your shul in Aventura, right? I'm in South
Absolutely.
Miami. We
Absolutely.
were in a very early wave. We came in the 60s, not more recent. More recent.
Early on. Right. So, from a perspective of having been in the country, that for a period of time you lost your country. Colombia was lost. They've made a comeback. Thank goodness it's starting to be a comeback that's effective. But from someone who lost their country, and then you watch what's going on in America now with the anti-Semitism and the anti-Zionism. And the opposite in Israel, we're unified. I mean, thousands of Haredim who make it their mission in life not to serve in Sahel, right? This is the main mission in life, in which they're willing to go to a social war in Israel, suddenly are volunteering. So enormous change. Israel has become unified. And in America, we have such division. We're starting to worry about this country, and can we hold on to it?
I mean, well, this film doesn't deal with, anti-Semitism or anything like that, but the anti-Semitism, obviously globally, but that I think we're starting to feel here in the United States, and the division has been exacerbated, or it's been brought to even more light by what's happening now. I guess I don't even know what the truth is. Is it shining the light, or is it revealing it, or is it propelling it? I don't even know what it's doing, but it's obviously very scary. I'm not even, I don't even have any answers or anything for it. Social, we can talk about social media and the media's involvement in it, and the way we've been siloed in our discussions and the algorithms that propel this. But there is no way to have an honest and clear discussion. It's actually impossible.
That's right.
And so, I mean, my hope with this film, and I think where you can have an honest discussion is with people and face to face. And I think it's important for this film to be shown. And I feel really committed to not only showing it here at the Miami Jewish Film Festival, but in other festivals going forward, to have the discussion, because I think when you talk, you create peace. I've been involved in a lot of types of projects, and I was in Northern Ireland in 2018 on the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday talks, Good Friday Accords. And I sat and met with the leaders of both sides who signed the peace agreement, including Jerry Adams, who led a terrorist organization. He led IRA and Sinn Féin, and hearing him talk about peace and what it took for him to create peace, and how he's in his view of things. He spoke specifically that peace is not through justice, peace is through peace is through talking, and through the reduction of the loss of life, and the only thing that matters is the reducing of loss of life. And once he understood that to be true, and once the Ulster Party and Gary McDonnell, who I also met with, whose father was killed by Jerry Adams and his men, they broke bread together and created peace together, it made me think that peace is possible. And for me, that's the only thing I've been worried about since that day. I'm not worried about right and wrong. I'm not worried about anything other than that. So from my perspective, the only conversation I'm interested in engaging in is pathways to that, and not in truth, even historical truth, even though I have my opinion on it.
Well, this film is so deeply honest, and brings forward such incredible questions. I think that the viewers, when they come to the film festival and see this, it is going to occupy them way beyond the movie. It's going to generate enormous conversation, and they're going to be able to delve deeply into questions that are dealt with only very superficially, obviously, in the media. And it's going to jar their conscience, and it's going to help them understand much better how Israelis deeply struggle with these moral and ethical questions. They're not just fighting a war, they're also trying to fight a war that internally they feel they're doing their best they can in a horrible situation in pursuing the moral and ethical path. So I think this movie is such an incredible contribution to the discussion, to the dialogue. I know it's going to be a major hit at the festival. People are going to really engage in it, and way beyond just that night or that afternoon of watching the movie. And I believe it's going to also be used in synagogue and adult education settings within our Jewish community as a basis for, in fact, a seminar or a course, because each question is so deep. So we thank you for your involvement in this movie, and all the incredible actors and actresses who had to really lose a lot of sleep getting into those characters, because it's their questions. In a sense, you can say it's not totally acting because it's them, but getting into those deep struggles in such a real live situation, which, although that situation itself was invented, in fact, it reflects true situations that have repeated themselves over and over in Israel's history, and we're going through right now exponentially. Never before in Israel's history have we ever dealt with this level of hostage taking, and this level of warfare against a terrorist organization. So we congratulate you on just a brilliant, brilliant movie, and all those who were involved in the acting and the making of the film. It's incredibly effective, and I think we're so privileged to have this as one of the films that will highlight our Jewish Film Festival here in the Miami area in the coming year. So we thank you for joining us, and everyone who's watched this, we hope that you will, of course, be there to see the film, or you'll hear this after the film, and that you will be able to participate in this incredible, powerful Jewish Film Festival that's coming up in 2024. But thank you all for being with us, and we wish you a Yom Tov, and we all pray Am Yisrael Chai and Shalom Yisrael.